Hello and welcome to the Rad Dad Show. Have you ever had your child throw a tantrum and you felt absolutely powerless about doing anything about it? You're in luck. Today my guest on the show is Sean Grover, a family therapist from New York City and the author of the book, When Kids Call the Shots. Sean, welcome to the show. Could you describe yourself?
Describe myself. Okay. I'm a psychotherapist. I work with children and teenagers and families. I've been doing it for almost 25 years. And I thought parenting would be a breeze because this is kind of what I do for a living, meeting with parents and kids. But my book was inspired by everything I did wrong and had to relearn after I became a dad.
So I got to say this. I looked up all the things that you had to say online and about your book and your interview. And I thought, wow, I'm either really going to like what you have to say, or I'm really going to hate this. But I think from everything I've read, it's actually right on point, right? And the title of your book is almost misleading. And I think it's misleading on purpose because from what I've seen in parenting, a lot of parents want to be right. What do you think?
Being right as a parent is the booby prize, you know. If you're right, it's usually at the cost of a relationship or creating hard feelings. Being right is a win-lose situation, and you want to avoid that as a parent as much as possible. Now, I'm curious, but what about the book? You thought I'm either going to like this or hate it. I'm interested in the hate part.
You call it When Kids Call the Shots, right? And it's sort of standoffish. It's like, oh, the kids are wrong. And my immediate reaction to that was like, well, no, of course the kids are not wrong. In fact, a lot of parents that I've met seems to have that attitude that the kids are wrong and we need to control the kids and we need to tell kids what to do. And I'm like, no. But then I read more into it and I was like, oh, wait a second. You're actually saying all the things that I agree with, right?
Wow, you're a good reader. I have a confession to make about the title of the book. When I had written it and some publishers were interested, and I had a meeting with the person who ultimately published the book. They said, it's great. We like what you did. There's only one problem. I said, what? And they said, you have no idea how to sell a book. She said, you have to write a book that blames children because parents don't want to take responsibility. She said, that book will sell. So after a lot of heartache and arguing, and it was either a publish or no publish, they made a deal with me that we'll shake the book up and reshape it, but your message will still be there within the chapters. So you're one of the very, very few people who picked up on the secret message, which is really parents need to get their acts together as the first step before they take a look at the children and start blaming and assigning blame to their partner or the school or the teachers or the neighborhood. So I can't believe you're the only interviewer that's ever picked up on that.
Maybe it's because I don't want to blame children.
Well, neither do I.
Yeah. I mean, for me and my wife, it's kind of our philosophy, right? We treat our children as fully grown adults with constraints, not necessarily as children. So we help them in trying to figure out what in each situation is good for them, but we don't necessarily want to push the blame on them because, they're like little ones, right? Why?
That's right. So, if you look, a friend of mine read the book and she called me and said, hey, that was a nice bait and switch. Because she saw that in the first few chapters, I'm asking parents about their history, their choices, their background, what their parents did, what they want to do differently. So we're spending a lot of time looking at the parents before we even settle down and consider the children. So I'm very impressed that you caught that.
So you're really good at your job then. Just anecdotally, I went to a couple of classes of, I think it's called positive parenting. My wife thought it would be a good idea. Personally, I'm not a big fan of classes, so it didn't work out quite as planned. But it was interesting to see how other parents react to suggestions about them and their children, and specifically about parents, right? There was this one mom, we were talking about some problem with her kid, quote unquote problem, none of them are really problems, but an issue she was having with her kid's behavior. And I said, well, maybe you should consider what he wants and what he thinks. And she kind of laughed about it. And they're friends with my wife. So later on, I find out she thought I was sarcastic and like joking about, asking what the kid wanted. Little did she know I was completely, honest with her. I'm like, this is what we do at home. We say, well, what do you think? And our 3-year-old tells us, and we're like, great. So
that's exactly right. That's the kind of culture you want to present in a family. That there's, of course, the parents provide leadership and they make the big decisions. But as a family, you establish a culture for communication, a culture for relating to one another. You collaborate on things. You include your children. But if you take that kind of dictatorial, because I said so, or I'm the boss, and you're just going to set up conflicts more and more down the line. No one really wants to be controlled in that level, even if you're a small child, unless it's dangerous, unless there's some sort of danger, then you intervene. But you want your child to have a voice. You want them to be assertive. You want them to speak up. So you got to give them a chance to do that at home.
Absolutely. And I got to say, just thinking of that class, one thing that was really important, and I think a lot of people really liked, we switched roles, and parents were reading dictatorial statements, basically, that they would say to their children off paper to adults. And then we were all talked about how it made adults feel. And if somebody tells you, go to bed, or, turn that off, you're like, I feel awful if somebody tells me that. But when we do that with our kids, we don't realize what we're doing.
That's right. We speak to our children in ways we would never speak to another adult. I always say, if you go to lunch with a friend and she tells you, your husband is really lazy, and your career is going nowhere, and I don't like your people you're hanging out with, that friendship would not survive. But with children, we have this hostage situation where we can say almost anything. But to me, it's the parent you are when no one's looking that really matters the most. And in workshops and things, that's a wonderful exercise to get their parents to experience what it feels like to be talked down to be chastised, to be criticized. I always say the 3 worst ways of influencing a child's behaviors: advice, criticism, comparison, complaint. Oh, I added the 4th one there. But those things really shut down communication. And what you're doing with your kid, this is the way we want to go. We want to open it up. Because a lot of time, if you engage in shaming or guilting or criticizing, that child takes those feelings internally. They become a part of how they operate in the world. So that it can trigger defiance, it can trigger depression, it can trigger anxiety. So the parent really creates these imprints very early on. And those become, that primary relationship between the parent and child becomes the way that child begins to interact in the world. So if you can start, I don't know, how old are your kids?
So the older one is 3 1/4, and the younger one is about 9 months.
That's fantastic. So you're really you're in a great place. A lot of times I get called in to do parenting workshops, or a teenager comes into my office. He's 16 years old, 17 years old. He sits down. He starts cursing at his mother. He starts blaming. There's so many bad habits. I sit in my chair. I don't even know where to begin to dismantle this bomb.
You remind me of the reason why I left New York.
Oh, really?
Well, I went to high school in New Jersey, and sort of this whole time everybody wanted to go to New York and hang out, and I could never relate because I felt like that was a very common attitude. Right now I'm in Seattle, and Seattle is very different. Seattle is very loving, very kind of emotional. People go outdoors. But New York is the opposite of that. And I wonder if just the sheer surrounding of where you grew up has a lot to do with, how you behave as a child.
I think absolutely. But the atmosphere of the family, the culture of the family, how people relate, that can insulate a child. I work with, I had an intern in my office who was definitely, without a doubt, the best intern I've ever had. She went on to become a physical therapist, and she has a great career. And I love this kid when I knew her way back when. But I didn't know until she was ready to leave that she had grown up in one of the worst, most dangerous, highest crime rate areas of Brooklyn. That I had been there when I was doing gang prevention conferences and things. This is one of the only neighborhoods that scared me to death. And actually, when they asked me to come to a conference there, it was the first thing I turned down. I just felt like I couldn't do it. But this girl who went on to have this thriving career, it was so wonderful, came out of that neighborhood. And so her parents were able to create a situation where she was well insulated against a hostile environment. And she was able to make choices that were in complete contrast to everyone around her. So I think we can look at, certainly there are challenges in the environment, but ultimately you can grow up on a farm in a beautiful scenic picture, postcard picture of a childhood, and it can be a horrible experience. So for me, it comes down to the family. It always comes down to the parents and the children and their relationship and the culture in the family. The other stuff is important, but not necessarily a deal breaker.
And you said at the beginning that you often get teenagers come in and they're already misbehaving, and sort of the problem probably started long ago, and now you have to go back and kind of fix it, the root of the problem. Is that where you were going?
Well, yes, because the parents start, they have a culture of disrespect in the family where they'll yell at the kids or scream at the kids or talk down to the kids. And it's only a matter of time before a child internalizes that, and that becomes the way they relate. So it just escalates as they get bigger. But you can see the seeds of it are from that initial way of interacting with the child, or trying to suppress them or hold them down or shame them in some way. That's going to fester. And as the child gets bigger and moves towards adolescence and begins to flex a little, they're going to play back that attitude to their parents. And the parents are shocked and everything, but I'm really not. I can always find some choices that were made early on that later just sort of took root, and now we're getting the harvest of these horrible habits.
So how long does it usually take to undo or mitigate these issues?
Well, it really depends on the age of the child. I'm always thrilled when I get asked to speak to elementary schools and talk to parents, because there's so much that can be done. By the time middle school, it gets a little tougher, and by middle or late high school, it's sometimes, honestly, you feel like you're climbing a glass wall. But if I can get the parents to take responsibility of their family for their behavior and start changing and evolving their behaviors and healing the relationship with their child and how they relate to their child, you'd be surprised how quickly things can turn around. But it always starts with the parent making that determination to change themselves and evolve themselves. And the children will come along, but we have to start with the parent first.
I got to ask, what's your success rate?
What do you mean? My statistics on my kids I work with? Or?
Well, I mean, I assume parents come to you because they want something to be done about it, but then they come in and they realize it's not about their kids, it's about them, and they have to change it. I wonder, how often they hit the barrier and then they never come back to you again because it's hard.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think in the early days of my practice, I got fired a lot. I wasn't a parent at that time, and I had a lot of very strong opinions. And I think over the years, especially becoming a parent, I really softened and had much more compassion for how difficult a job this is with zero training. So the parents that I see the progress with, or the children I see the progress with, really, if the parent commits to working on themselves, we have a very good outcome is likely. But if a parent does what I call dry cleaning therapy, where you just drop your kid off to get straightened out and you pick them up, it's going to be much harder to see lasting change.
But what do you do in the latter case? Is there anything you can do to help kids understand that, what their parents are going through and help them mitigate the situation at home?
Yeah, sometimes, often if I have a situation, let's say there's a hostile parent or a hostile divorce or gosh, I deal with that so much. If a child's in adolescence, they're trying to define themselves as different and separate from their parents, and they want to move beyond the orbit of the family. A lot of times I can harvest that energy. So they can make different choices and it feels good, or they can decide the person they want to be and it feels good. Or I may say to them, look, your parents are your parents. Maybe they'll never change. What do you want out of life? And what are you going to do differently from them? Then using that separation individuation phase where they're really branching out, I can help them to make better choices, even if in the house their parents aren't.
That's really good. That gives kids a whole other outlet to express themselves.
Yeah, and it provides, in that age range, really, we're really looking at models and mentors as like very powerful figures. So if I can get a kid an internship, if I can offer him an internship working with me in adolescent groups, once they begin to attach to another adult who offers a different way of being, they'll follow that person anywhere. I had a woman call me, the mother called me the other day, and she said her son Daryl really liked talking to me when he was in 4th grade, and he wants to come back. And I thought, oh, great, Daryl's welcome to come back. I don't remember who he was at the time, and I said, so yeah, tell Daryl to give me a call. How old is he now? And she said, 32 years old. So once a kid attaches to you in a very positive way, you can't shake them off. Most teenagers come to my office as hostages. They don't want to be in therapy. I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting their time. And within a few sessions, really, I can't get rid of them.
It's a great recurring business model.
Yes.
No, but that's great. I would hope that there should be an easier method. I mean, obviously, it's great to go and talk to you and get this resolved, right? But it shouldn't be that hard. Like, it shouldn't be that hard to find help that you need to necessarily, like, going and talking to a therapist, in my opinion at least, should be like the last resort. You should be able to figure this out and then go and maybe help. Your job could be to help them figure it out, but there's got to be something in front of that. Is there?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I talk about this in the book very early on, where I say, before you contact a therapist, before you involve your family in this, which can be very expensive and time-consuming, and there's no guarantees. I mean, depending on the personality of the therapist and training and everything. But before you do any of that, there's plenty you can do at home. One of the favorite talks I give is the 5 things every teenager needs. And I ask parents, before your appointment, I want you to go through this list and see, does your kid have tension outlets, meaning cardio workouts 3-4 times a week, which cut anxiety and depression by 70%? Do they have models and mentors? Are you providing enough structure, limits, and boundaries? Is there a possibility of any learning problems that could be fostering these troubles? So a lot of parents will come to me for a consultation, and I'll give them a lot of homework. And often I'll just work with the parents 2 or 3 times. I'll never meet their kids, because once the parent starts managing the family differently, they start to get different outcomes. And that's really, you can bypass a lot of therapy and so forth. By the same token, if you drop your kid in therapy and don't do anything, don't work on yourself, don't challenge the culture in your family, don't provide better leadership, that's not going to work either.
Is it all over the spectrum, or are the families who drop their kids off in therapy expecting you to fix them, usually in a group of a socioeconomic status?
No, it's all over. I thought when I wrote this book that I was writing about a very specific group of parents that I was seeing over and over again in my office in downtown Manhattan. But since then, the book has been published in Russia, China, and Korea so far. And I get calls from all over the place with people and emailing me about this dynamic. So I was shocked that this was a much bigger issue than I had realized.
In a way, that's pleasant to know that everybody makes mistakes. It's not just a certain group. But tell me, so you wrote this book. You said you started doing this work before you became a dad, and then you became a parent, and things became clearer. Can you talk about that transition and kind of what you learned and how you apply these methods at home?
Well, I don't know if they became clearer. I mean, I everything I did based on books and my training and trying to do the right thing, I don't think it was organic to who I was or the culture I grew up in. And it just backfired over and over. I have so many stories of my daughter having these huge public meltdowns that were just so humiliating, and I was losing my temper. I was getting angry. I was punishing, and things were just getting worse and worse. I think I had one of the many rock bottoms was I was at a party at a friend's house, and a bunch of children, everyone was behaving so nicely, and we're getting ready to leave, and my daughter had this full-throated screaming that she didn't want to leave and don't touch me, and here I am in front of 20 or 30 people who know I'm a therapist who works with children, and this kid is a nightmare. I mean, she is just, I died a million deaths, and I went home, and I thought, I have to start over. I got to figure out how to do this completely differently because I'm screwing up. And that was the seeds of the book, which really was about me maturing and making better choices. And then in response to that, my children began to mature and make better choices.
I think it's great to hear that even professionals make mistakes and have to go and fix them. I think that's extremely reassuring, in fact, and it's a great message to send to parents, right? That it's just like, guys, you don't have any training in this, and I do, and I made mistakes, so therefore, like, you really don't have to blame yourself, but it's good to work on it, and then you can get better.
Oh, absolutely, and parenting is so. It's just so people don't recognize how difficult it is until it's too late, until you're a parent. You don't know the kind of partner you have. Their choice as a parent may be different from your choices as a parent. I was working on this new workshop that I called Surviving Parenthood because the statistics on people getting divorced and separating within the birth of their first child are just startling. And people were really coming apart after they became parents. So the more I study this, the more I recognize that we really do need more training, that people really do need to take a different position on this. In the old days, you would just check off, I graduated high school, I graduated college, I got married, I had a kid. It was just a list. There were no parenting workshops. There were very few parenting books. If I ask parents in one of my workshops, whose parents here attended a parenting workshop, almost no hands go up. So we're only at the very beginning of understanding the profound impact parenting has, and how we have to do better.
You said something about the divorce rate, and it is extremely high, I think, all over the world at this point. But I'm wondering, and as a parent, I can see how there are a lot of stressful situations, and unless you and your partner really understand each other and are willing to work together, it could get really stressful. So how would you help new and maybe upcoming parents or new couples think through this and really figure out if, one, they're ready to have kids, and two, if they're in a good relationship and they should stay together to have kids, or maybe it's actually not going to work out and they should make different choices?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because parents usually come to my office when the problems have already manifested. But I would say with the new parents, that I'd really want them to begin to have a dialogue about with each other about how they were raised, what their parents did right, what they didn't do right, what their own expectations are as parents. I really want them to explore that part of their personality together as much as possible. Because what happens, it's a little bit of a gamble. I meet someone, get married, have a kid, let's see how it goes. I'm not a gambler. I've never been. But the new parents that I've worked with, if they really work on their relationship and their communication and prepare themselves emotionally the same way they would prepare a house for a child, they have a much better shot. There's much more mindfulness there. There's much more attention. doesn't show consideration for choices. And as parents, you're constantly, I know my wife and I have a weekly date. We go out every Thursday night, and part of that date is like the week in review, where we can talk about how our kid's doing, our concerns, and if we're mad at each other, we can get it out there. If I didn't appreciate what she said in front of my daughter, I'm going to tell her then, So we're really working on that. And so with new parents, you want to try to do that as much as possible so they have a framework to process difficult moments and have a lot more tools when things go wrong, because they're going to go wrong. Children get sick, children have accidents, people lose their job. Life can get much more difficult after being a parent, because now you're responsible for a whole nother person. It's not just you. So we really want to explore that terrain as much as possible and prepare for that. It's not going to prevent problems from happening, but it's going to leave parents with far greater tools to manage them.
I think that's an excellent advice. And personally, I've never been a fan of tools, but then after becoming a parent, I realized that it is valuable, at least for one of the parents. Like, I know I'm very free flow, but my wife really likes to read and she really likes to know what's available to her. So when we get to talk, then she'll say, oh, like, I've read this and we should do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense to me just emotionally. And then it works out between the two of us. But
that sounds wonderful. That sounds great. Is she there? Is she listening?
No. Well, she's with the kids right now, so I can record this. But honestly, right? Like, if I had to be a parent with myself, in exactly the same person, it would be a lot harder, because we'd probably have more fun on some occasions, but it would also be a lot more difficult because I wouldn't have another opinion, and that's just right. A matter of recognizing that you need the other opinion and that you both should work on it together.
Yes, that's a question I ask parents when I work with them. Who's better at what? I can tell you in my marriage, I was awful at homework. I mean, geez, I was the wrong guy to do homework with. I was impatient. I just didn't enjoy it. But my wife could really get in there. She was fantastic with him. So my girls have always done well in school. I take zero credit for that. But there are things that I provided them with. If they come to me, particularly with writing ideas or they're working on essays, they know, go to Papa. Papa can help me with this. If it's about math and other things, go to Mama. So that these differences can be your strengths.
It seems like we're collecting a lot of material for your second book. Well, honestly, behavior of the kids is just one aspect, right? But there's just so much more that parents can learn. And what I found with parenting, you can pretty much read every side of the story. If you go online, you can find the answers to everything, and they'll always be different, and there'll be conflicting advice. And I feel like part of it is finding what works for you and what you can agree with. But I'm wondering how you mitigate that in your practice, right? Because if somebody comes and says, well, I should really be hitting my children if they don't do something right, you're like, whoa, this is not right. All right. Yeah. But how do you help parents recognize where something they may truly think is correct is not?
Yeah, it depends on how I am every particular day. Sometimes I'm much better at gently nudging a parent towards better choices. And sometimes I have to really confront them. And I'll say, look, you're paying me a lot of money for help. And I'm telling you, what you're doing is so destructive that no therapist, if you continue it, is going to be able to fix your kid. We got to start with this. And they'll say, like, well, my father hit me, or my mother yelled at me, and they parade out all these things as if that justifies something, repeating a pattern that maybe there are better choices. So sometimes I had a big, the other day with a stepdad in my office, he stormed out. I'm never going to see him again. But he was really violent in his language. He was invasive. He would kick open a door and scream at a child. And the more gentle I tried to point out to him, could you have handled that differently? No, this is who I am. This is, I can tell you, I don't think that couple is together anymore because he refused to evolve, and it was so obviously damaging to his stepchildren. But he stormed out. He didn't want to hear that he had to work on himself. He wanted someone to tell him these kids are wrong and they just need discipline. And that, that's a tough situation depending on the character of that person. I remember I said to one dad who was just so obnoxious and abusive to his wife, and he was talking and he turned to me and said, "Why do you look so confused?" And I said, "I'm confused that I'm trying to figure out why she stays with someone like you." And sometimes with a bully, you have to hit them a little hard before they respect you. That man went into therapy and actually joined a father's group with me. And later he said, I was the first person that ever talked to him in that way. So it's a tricky business. Other people would have just stormed out and went and wrote bad things about me online. But for some reason, many of them, when you confront them with a bit of an edge, they'll respect you more, particularly if it's a bullying parent. And they'll start to listen, because ultimately they want to walk all over you too, and you can't allow that.
Let's talk about bullying parents. Your book is about kids that bully their parents. What about parents that bully their kids? I haven't heard about that very much, but I want to know.
Well, I think it's far more common, actually. These are parents that tend to be very impatient. They have certain expectations for their kids, and if their kids don't meet these expectations, they become very critical. Often a child will say to me, "I feel like my parents want me to be a different person." And actually, that's pretty accurate, because they expected a certain kind of child. So they're not dealing with the child in front of them. They're dealing with this expectation that makes the child feel like a failure. So parents tend to run on a lot of disappointment or shaming and frustration. And actually, if I'm going to really get to the core of this, there's a part of their personality that just never really matured, that they themselves can't handle being frustrated and be mature about it. They revert to almost like childlike behavior. And I have had in my office, I had a fist fight break out between a mother and daughter. And just before it broke out, and they hit the floor and knocked over a table, and I was amazed because the daughter was yelling at the mother, and the mother was yelling at the daughter, and they sounded like two children. There was no adult in the room. So becoming a parent, you really have to face these immaturities, these struggles you have, because what you have, problems in relationships with friends or bosses or acquaintances, there are always patterns that show up. Those patterns are going to show up in your relationship, and they're going to show in your relationship with your kids. So if you're a bit of a hothead and you blow off steam at the office, or people, strangers, or in the car, you're going to do that with your children. If you're impatient in other areas of your life, you're going to be impatient with them. If you're controlling, those controlling people that make you feel like they're sucking the oxygen out of the room, they're going to do that with their children. So these are patterns that are ingrained in the personality of the adult that really need to mature. And they're just taking those into their new role as a parent. This is getting so serious and depressing.
Well, I have a kind of vivid imagination, and I imagine you sitting there in your office with mother and daughter fighting, and part of it is, it's shocking.
Well, the interesting thing is that, if a child comes at a parent in a kind of, angry or yelling, or if it's a teenager, particularly teenagers are so unstable and they have trouble with their moods, and there's all these reasons why they have these. Parent, you can't go to that child's level. You can't abandon your role as an adult and start name calling back or start cursing back. I never forget. I had turned around. I was reaching for my date book. It was on the desk behind me, and I heard this big slam, and I thought, whoa, what? I thought something fell off the wall, and it was the two of them hit the floor, rolling. I had to pull them apart. But really, the child came at the parent with all this aggression, and the parent came right back and escalated it. There was no parent. Basically, I was prying apart two children. And I think with the bullying thing is that parents really have a complete misunderstanding about what's effective and what isn't. They will stick to that bullying thing when all the evidence is it's not working.
And you just said something I think very important, and that comes up in the interviews as well, where the most effective parents recognize that their kids are not yet equipped emotionally to deal with a lot of things, and it really is on the adult, on the parent, to sort of take the emotional beating, but also help their kids, because, you know, whether a teenager or a 3-year-old, like, you can't expect a child to deal with certain things if they're going through a lot already, and it really is on the parent. But I wonder, like, how do you tell an adult that, you know, so that they don't storm out of your office, but how do you tell them that perhaps they need to get educated and they may be being lazy?
It's tricky, and I tend to, if an adult's really in trouble with those choices, or really, really stubborn, I tend to share a little bit more of myself, my own struggles, my own disappointments, and how hard, how I struggle as a parent. And so they feel that they're not alone, that I'm a member of that club, and I'm not trying to fix them or change them, but together we're going to go on this journey and see if we can come up with better outcomes. Because ultimately the parent is the model. You model behavior, communication, everything. So your child's going to internalize that. There was a moment, one of my daughters was in middle school, and we were in the bathroom, all crammed in our New York City bathroom, 3 people trying to get ready to leave the house. And she said she was worried about something, and I said something really rude, like snarky. I made like a bad joke about a very sensitive issue. And she turned around and threw a glass of water in my face. And here I am with a suit on, with my tie, and I'm drenched. And I remember at that moment, so much flashed through my mind. But I also recognized that what I said was way out of line. So I didn't say anything. I walked away. And for a day or two, there was a lot of silence between us. And she came and apologized, and I said I wasn't ready to accept her apology, that I was really upset by that, and I just need some more time to figure out how that even happened. And I just left if you let a lot of silence is a great tool, a great leverage with children, because it forces them to reflect, it forces them inward. But anyway, we survived that, and a year or two later, my daughter wrote this essay in class called "The Lowest Moment in My Life." And it was about throwing that glass of water. Now, if I had responded, if I had thrown a glass of water at her, if I had screamed at her, if I had gotten violent with her, like she was on borderline violent with me, there never would have been that introspection. There would never have been that reflective space. So, I tell that story just to illustrate, and I may even tell that to a really, really stubborn parent, that I was like you. I didn't want to change. I thought I had all the answers, and I didn't. And so here we are together, these 2 people who've stumbled and made mistakes together. Let's figure out if we can do this differently. And I never assign parents scripts. My book does not say talk this way or do this. It's got to come organically from who you are, authentically, when you make these new choices, because you just can't parrot phrases that I'm sure you've experienced that, where you try to say things you've read to your child. It feels like you're an imposter. But if it comes from who you are in an authentic way, we have a much better chance of that decision having a greater impact.
I can see why people love your book and really come to counseling, because from everything you say, it's excellent.
Have I converted you? I've converted you. You're ready. You love therapy now. You're going to move back to Manhattan and get a therapist.
If I needed a therapist, I'd come to you.
Okay.
The more we talk, the more interesting things pop up, and I really want to cover as much of it as we can. Well, when kids come to you and they're already frustrated, let's talk a little bit about the environment, right? Because what we've noticed, it may be an unpopular opinion, but there are a lot of things about our environment that also influence kids, primarily things like screens and sugar.
Oh, absolutely. Screen time. Every family should have a contract about how they manage phones. I have this whole list of 10 points for managing technology in your home. It's the science behind the negative impacts on unlimited access to technology, unlimited access to the internet, social media, and so forth, and the impact it has on these developing minds it's terrifying, really. So there is a lot in the environment that parents are forced to manage because when there's just so much out there that can really do damage to their children.
And with all that said, how long does it usually take to convert parents? Because we talk about parents and their own issues, kids and their issues, environment. What do we talk like? Is it weeks, months? How long does this therapy take on average to help somebody really become a new family?
But that depends. That really depends on how far the parents are willing to go. I've seen things turn around in rapidly when parents are super committed to making new changes and changing the culture in the family. I'm working with one couple with a daughter who was having she's 12, and boy, the stories I heard about this kid, I couldn't believe. But it really came down to the parents didn't have any structure in the house. They rewarded constantly. They overindulged her. They built this monster. But they came to me because they were just absolutely destroyed. The home had become a war zone. They were so eager for help. And I think we've been working together, it's about 4 months now. And now I'm seeing them every other week. And things are much better. I don't think we'll probably finish up before this, in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And they'll come back when they want to. But what impressed me is, as a couple, they really took ownership of the situation and were determined as a couple to change it. And that meant a radical rebooting of their parenting style. But if you have that kind of commitment to parenting and to and taking responsibility, you can change things rapidly. Kids want more structure. They want strong leadership. They don't want to no child bullies their parent and feels good about themselves. It actually devastates their self-esteem. So interestingly, when parents step up and say, okay, no cell phone until your homework's done, and the cell phone's off at 8:30. All technology goes off at 8:30. They always say there's a big backlash, but within 3 days, everything's much calmer. And they can see their kids' anxiety has come down and actually seem to be relieved that someone stepped in and did that. So it all comes back to the parenting, and their willingness to take responsibility.
Well, I just hope that enough parents listen to it and agree with your message and do something about it because it's going to be so much better for, the parents and the kids, and just, it'd be a pleasure to see more happy families. I think.
Absolutely. And everything I do with a family, or when a family comes in or parents come in and I'm looking at the child and I'm hearing these stories, I think, what's missing? Rather than let's fix the child, what's missing here? And usually if you can address what's missing, like the overindulgence in technology or playing violent video games or not having a bedtime, basic stuff. If all that stuff's missing, that's the equation that's adding up to this outcome. So by reshaping the causes, you get different effects. And that's really the express lane to turning around these problems. When parents aren't willing to do that, these problems become characterological, and that becomes a way of life for the child. And that's really scary.
So let's say somebody is reading your book and they like it and they're trying to use it at home, but it's not quite working out, and they don't live in Manhattan. What can they do to make it better?
Oh my gosh. I would hope that people could read my book and not have to call me, because in chapter 6 and 7, we really talk about how to assemble your support team. There are so many people. First, unite with your partner, your spouse. You want to enlist support from friends. There's so many people at schools that get paid to help you. Guidance counselors, psychologists, talking to other parents, attending a parenting workshop. A lot of parents feel a lot of shame around when their kids are misbehaving, and they tend to isolate themselves. But in the book, I recommend, step by step, these worksheets that you fill in. Who can you contact today? Who can you talk to today? Who can you reach out to today? So they can build more of a support system. And I think there's more people out there with the internet, and parenting is this huge industry, actually, to be honest. I mean, my gosh, if you Google parenting, billions of hits probably come up. There's plenty of ways to get support. You don't have to hire a therapist or fly to New York City and come see me. But sitting down and making that phone call is hard for a lot of parents. But you'd be surprised once you start talking about the struggles you're having, other people step forward and talk about their struggles. Before you know it, you have a movement and you have a support team, and things begin to change.
That's an excellent advice, and hopefully it helps a lot of parents make things better. Before we go, though, let's finish on a bright note. Tell me.
I didn't know.
I mean, it wasn't necessarily gloomy, but a lot of this stuff needs to be addressed. So it's not the happiest thing people would deal with.
Right.
But in your personal experience, what are the happiest things you've done or seen as a parent that people should really look forward to in their parenting life?
I love discovering my children as they mature and grow. I've never felt the need for them to be anything other than themselves. And so they're very different. Parenting doesn't determine everything. I mean, you can have 3 kids from a family and completely 3 different personalities. But I really love, if I go to see my youngest daughter play in a concert, she's a wonderful musician, or my oldest daughter writes and she sends me a story she wrote from college. I am so filled with pride, not just for them. I am proud of them, and I'll always be, but also I'm a little proud of myself. I sent this child into the world who's thriving. And that is one of the best feelings I've ever had, bar none. Parenting, all the things I did, publishing books, or other, that really doesn't even come close to the joy and satisfaction I see of my children thriving in the world and being authentic and developing their talents. That's just a thrill ride that never ends.
I hope it's true in the long run.
Hope is a thing of feathers.
Well, fun fact about parenting, you just keep doing all these things every day and you don't know how they work out for 20, 30 years. So
that's right. Or you do something and think that didn't work. I'm not going to do that again. Or maybe I can do that differently. But, mindfulness and, people don't really associate that with parenting. But if you think about mindlessness parenting, where you're impulsive and just reactive and all, that's just so risky. But this mindfulness where you notice, hey, this works. If I have breakfast on these days with my kids, she's in much better shape for school. Or if I get up earlier and have everything ready, so you're figuring it out. We're all figuring it out. And I think bringing that kind of mindfulness to your choices and examining them, what's working, what isn't working, that can be fun. And you can apologize. Your kids love when their parents make mistakes and say, I handled that wrong. I totally screwed that up. I shouldn't have said that. What a mistake. They love that because now you're making it safe for them to make mistakes and also apologize or make a different choice. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
Oh, no, the great point. And it also puts you on their level and reminds them that you're both in it together, that it's not dictator relationship. So, yeah.
That's right.
That's a great point.
You're a human being. Eventually, they're going to discover that.
Sean, thank you very much for coming. It's been great. There's so much to unpack here, and I'd be happy to talk to you again. They should go to your website, SeanGrover.com. Is there anything else that parents should do after listening to this episode?
I think they should make sure they do more than just being a parent. I found that when parents get in touch with their passions or things they love to do, and they go out and do it, they go out and do a sport they haven't done in years, they play an instrument again, they publish something, their kids take such joy and pride in their parents. So put parenting aside for a little bit and rediscover the parts of yourself you abandoned because you thought that's what parenting needed you to do. It's not. Kids want happy parents. An unhappy parent is a burden for a child at any age. So taking better care of yourself and applying these tools for your kids is also addressing these parts of yourself that need to be satisfied too. So I would say, do your parenting, but put that aside and lead your life in a way that will make your kids proud.
So much excellent advice. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. You make it so easy.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of The Red Dad Show. If you enjoyed this episode, as always, please grab a link and send it to one of your friends who might enjoy it as well. And of course, if you don't mind reviewing us on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast, please do. Till next time.